a child dead, a mother on trial, a defense that claims this was an accident, not a murder. The 2011 trial of Casey Anthony becomes a national obsession. The prosecution paints Casey as a self-absorbed party girl who killed her daughter to regain her freedom. But the defense drops a bombshell. Kaylee drowned, and Casey's father helped cover it up. They go further, accusing George Anthony of sexual abuse and Kaylee's death of being hidden out of shame. We explore dramatic testimony from forensic scientists, family members, and experts. Conflicting stories, questionable computer searches, and an emotional jury push the case to the brink. Behind the scenes, Judge Belvin Perry navigates the chaos, and the jury, isolated and under pressure, prepares to decide Casey's fate. This is Scarlet Tavern.
Hey.
Okay.
You gotta remember to put these things with alcohol in them sometime.
Yeah. Maybe if we're not recording during the week.
Yeah.
The only days that we could do it is a Saturday or Sunday.
And wait a minute, I just remembered something. You won't let me drink before these.
No.
This is an injustice, everybody. Put that down as a podcast idea.
No.
So, yeah, we're going to get into the actual trial. And then after this, we've got the wrap-up of Casey Anthony, and then we move on to some interesting things.
That's putting it mildly.
So,
I was very disturbed at some of the things I had to research for the next podcast. Very disturbed.
yeah, so next is the Toy Box Killer, also known as David Parker, or David Parker Ray. Yeah, that one's an interesting one. So, all right. So, as one of the most sensational criminal trials in modern U.S. history looms, the critical process of selecting a jury for the state of Florida versus Casey Marie Anthony began under extraordinary scrutiny. Long before opening statements were delivered and evidence was presented, the battle lines were already being drawn. Not in the courtroom, but in the hearts and minds of those who would ultimately hold Casey Anthony's fate in their hands. Because of the intense media coverage and widespread public bias in Orange County, where Kaylee Anthony's disappearance and Casey's subsequent arrest had dominated headlines for years, the court made the rare decision to select a jury from a different jurisdiction entirely. The chosen venue was Pinellas County, nearly 100 miles away, in the hope of finding potential jurors less saturated by the relentless media storm that had engulfed Orlando. Pinellas County is a shithole.
That is very rare. They wouldn't even move the jury or the venue for OJ, and all they wanted to do was just go up to San Francisco. And
just so keep in mind, you have Orlando. Pinellas County is like Tampa.
It doesn't seem that far away. I don't know Florida, so I don't know. They say 100 miles. It does seem far, but on a map, it doesn't seem like Orlando and Florida and Tampa are that far.
Orlando's here-ish. Well, Disney's not in Orlando. Just an FYI to everybody. Disney is not Orlando.
Okay.
It's not. Disney is not in Orlando. And Tampa's over here. So, well, it's more Clearwater area is Pinellas County. So it's like St. Petersburg, Clearwater, right on the water.
I almost feel like they should have just left the state of Florida entirely. Maybe try and go to Georgia or Alabama or something.
It wouldn't matter at this point. It was nationwide.
True. I feel like though in Florida it probably would have been particularly close to
everywhere it was close to home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem with this is, again, this was it was all over the country, but this was a very big deal in Florida. So her trial was 2011. I was already, I'd left Florida at that point. I was living in Pennsylvania.
I was
at that point. I was getting ready to join the military.
I was already in Kuwait at that point.
So
let's see.
this is May 2011.
Let's just not.
I
So you
already
hadn't joined yet.
No, I did. I signed my contract. I was in debt.
But you didn't join yet.
No,
Until you go to basic.
Which was
You're done with
September.
Basic. So from the very first day of Vordaer, which don't correct me.
God,
this is
you must
Florida.
speak. You must speak the French correctly, sir.
I'm speaking this like a Floridian, which is where all of this is based.
Clear.
The real English.
That's.
Listen, we've talked about this. The Southern accent is as close to the British dialect.
The Virginian accent is
the British dialect. So Southerners are the true Americans.
Okay.
You can't say shit. You're Canadian.
You're a Yank.
I'll take Yankee over Canadian any day. Thank you very much.
Fucking Yankees, man. What did they do for our country?
Win the war, end slavery. Need I go on?
Yes.
No, I got nothing else so
Because
far.
I'm pretty sure, wasn't it a Southern man who tried to abolish slavery?
Are you talking about John Brown?
No.
Who then?
I'm pretty sure, well, I guess technically he's Midwest.
I was about to say, Abraham Lincoln was not Southern.
But
He was from, I believe it was Illinois.
Illinois, yes.
Yeah.
But granted, behind every man is what? A good woman. And where's she from?
I don't know. She was crazy.
Here. She's from Kentucky.
Yeah.
We can actually go visit her house. She's from Lexington.
That's right.
We can actually go visit Mary Todd Lincoln's house.
Yeah.
But and I'm pretty sure, wasn't it a Yank that assassinated the president?
John Wilkes Booth was very much a Southerner.
Yeah. It was evident that seating in a partial jury would be anything but routine. Over the course of nearly 2 weeks, prosecutors and defense attorneys under the supervision of Chief Judge Belvin Perry combed through a pool of approximately 600 potential jurors, seeking individuals who could set aside personal beliefs, preconceived notions, and emotional reactions to deliberate solely on the facts of the case. Each prospective juror underwent extensive questioning, not only about their familiarity with the case and exposure to media, but about their attitudes toward the death penalty, forensic science, and even parenting. Their backgrounds were dissected, their psychological resilience assessed, and their ability to endure weeks of sequestration carefully considered. This trial would not just demand attention, it would require isolation. Jurors would be cut off from their families, their jobs, and the outside world for up to 2 months, an enormous personal sacrifice for those selected. Keep in mind, you get paid like $1 a day doing jury trials.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's for civilian jobs like non-government workers. If they get selected for jury duty, it's the same with like if you're in the Guard. They have to hold your job. They have to everything like that, but they're not required to pay you for while you're away on jury duty. So,
and you're wrong, by the way. John Wilkes Booth is from Maryland, so that makes him a Yankee.
Actually, Maryland is considered the South.
It's not the South.
No, it's not.
That's offensive. Maryland is not the fucking South.
I'm just saying they tried to secede from the Union to join the South. I'm just saying.
Maryland is not the South. I will slap you in the face if you ever say that again. Maryland belongs with New York.
Wow. Okay, hold on now. Let's not go extreme
where
there.
nobody wants to live.
Well, that's true. I certainly don't want to live there anymore.
So the specter of capital punishment loomed large during jury selection. Since prosecutors were seeking the death penalty, jurors needed to be death qualified, meaning they had to be open to both life imprisonment and execution as possible sentences if a guilty verdict was reached. This requirement automatically disqualified many people with moral, ethical, or religious objections to capital punishment, further narrowing an already difficult pool, which it's Florida. It's very religious. So despite these challenges, on May 20th, 2011, 12 jurors and 5 alternates were finally sworn in. The final panel included a mix of blue and white collar workers, a retired nurse, a high school dropout, an IT worker, a cook, a bookseller, and a man who worked at Disney, which is not in Orlando. Notably, the jury included 7 women and 5 men. They were from diverse backgrounds, but shared one unavoidable commonality. None could return to their normal lives until they had reached a verdict in a case where public outrage was given, regardless of outcome. Immediately after selection, jurors were transported to Orlando under tight security and placed in a hotel for the duration of the trial. From that moment forward, they were sequestered, meaning no internet, no newspapers, no phone calls that hadn't been screened, and no unsupervised contact with the outside world. Meals, entertainment, even their movements within the hotel were controlled to prevent any external influence. It was a form of temporary imprisonment, ironically administered to those entrusted with upholding the law.
That's why everybody tries to get the hell out of jury duty.
Yeah, that's why I chose what I did. I got out of regular jury duty, and I was able to just literally, they just come in and I did grand jury duty, which you don't even appear before anybody. You are the ones that send them to grand jury. So you just hear from the cops and then mark it off, done. So the pressures weren't just procedural, they were psychological. This jury wasn't just being asked to sit in judgment of one woman. They were standing in for a nation watching in outrage, mourning a child they have never met, and deeply divided over what justice meant.
Yeah.
Manat.
Do.
From the public's perspective, the jurors carried the weight of an entire country's expectations. But inside the courtroom, the law demanded something far more precise. Not emotion, not speculation, but evidence, and the ability to weigh it without fear or favor. That was the oath they had taken, and over the next 6 weeks, they would be forced to hold to it, no matter how loud the voices outside the courthouse became. There's no point in correcting it now because we're past that.
No, there's no evidence.
So, when the courtroom doors opened for opening statements on May 24th, 2011, the prosecution's tone was sharp, deliberate, and emotionally resonant. Led by Assistant State Attorney Linda Drain Burdick, an experienced, methodical litigator, the prosecution's case against Casey Anthony would rest not on direct evidence, but on a carefully constructed tower of circumstantial details designed to portray one undeniable truth: that Casey had deliberately ended her daughter Kaylee's life.
I do not envy. I would not have envied
the prosecution.
No, because
they have no physical evidence.
You have no. I mean, we know she's dead, but
that showed her body showed no evidence.
You're right. I mean, however she died, whether it was directly caused by Casey, as in like she poisoned or whatever, all that, unless she didn't stab him, she didn't shoot the little girl, so there would be no skeletal evidence. Everything rotted away.
I think this probably never would have gone to trial if it didn't have such a public outrage, because you never go to trial with circumstantial evidence.
Oh yeah,
you don't even arrest somebody with circumstantial evidence.
And all the evidence that they had was all circumstantial.
Everything about this is circumstantial.
There was no physical evidence of anything.
I mean,
the only thing we have is that she's dead.
Yeah, and I mean, legitimately, the defense has a case to make for this was an accidental. She panicked and she made a really dumb decision. I mean, if again, Kayde's right. If this had been any other person with not even any close to this media, manslaughter, go to jail, 15 years.
That.
Yeah,
if that.
Yeah, she do at least 10 years.
No,
I think so.
No, because it was.
If it was an accidental death, she would have gotten tampering with evidence, things like that. She probably would have done 5 years and then another 5 on probation.
Maybe, yeah. Probably. I think the circumstances, though, would have demanded a harsher sentence because of her actions.
I just know how Florida's justice system is. I've been in the Florida courtrooms,
and that's if the judge would even do the 5 years.
I think they would. Yeah. So it was a heavy burden, and they knew it. But Drain Burdick, along with fellow prosecutors Jeff Ashton and Frank George, believed that they could lead the jury through a tangled web of behavior, deception, and forensic fragments. The pattern would speak louder than any confession ever could. So here's the thing. Here's what, if you've never been involved in a court case and never had to do it, the one thing you have to understand, the key phrase is without a reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm.
That is the key phrase. I could technically go to trial, a jury trial with no evidence, but if I can talk well enough and convince that jury that that person is guilty, where they look at a non-guilty verdict and they go, I'm not sure. Well, that's without a reasonable doubt. That's thrown away. So now, okay, they're probably going to convict them. All I got to do is convince these jurors. I don't care about anybody else. I've got to convince these specific people. And what happens, especially in cases like this, is because the prosecution and the defense are given the list of jurors. So even in a case like this, they're given the list of jurors because you need to figure out how to speak to these jurors. That's the whole point. Jurors are the ones that make the decision. Judge, in a jury trial, the judge has no decision-making power. That's it. He can recluse a juror, all of that, but that's why there's alternates. So and now that's a closely guarded secret of who the jurors are. But so these prosecutors are going to look at each juror, figure out, because again, remember, the prosecution is also the ones that pick the jurors. So they're going to look and go, okay, we know how to get to this person. We know how to get to this person. We know how to get to this person. You play on people's emotions.
I believe during the jury selection process, both sides have a number of, we want juror 1 to 7 stricken, and then it's like, I don't want them. Both the defense and the prosecution. After, I don't know. This is I've studied like law in high school, and I don't remember if once they're up, it's like you just get what you get, you got to start at least.
You get one chance to strict jurors.
Yeah, you get.
Then after that, that's it.
Yeah, so that's why they have jury consultants to just basically read people,
which make a lot of money.
Yeah.
So the prosecution opened with a haunting image. Kaylee Anthony, a vibrant 2-year-old, had vanished without explanation, and for 31 days, her mother, Casey, told no one. In fact, they said, Casey had lived as if Kaylee had never existed at all. The first foundational element of their case was motive, not one fueled by hate, but by selfishness. Casey, they argued, was a young woman shackled by motherhood, longing for freedom. Kaylee, in this narrative, was an obstacle to that freedom. The prosecution painted Casey as a mother who had grown tired of responsibility, tired of pretending. They detailed her party lifestyle during those 31 days, nights at Fusion nightclubs, shopping trips, and drinking with friends, and noted how she got a tattoo that read Bella Vita, Italian for beautiful wife, just days after Kaylee's disappearance.
Life.
I said life.
Sounded like wife.
I said life.
I heard life.
I heard wife.
Maybe it's that bag on your head that's making you not hear right. Just days after Kaylee's disappearance. It wasn't simply reckless behavior, the prosecution insisted. It was evidence of a deliberate choice to shed the burden of parenthood without facing its consequences. From there, they layered in what they believed to be scientific support. They presented testimony from Dr. Arpad Voss, a forensic anthropologist and researcher from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, who specialized in human decomp. Voss testified that air samples from the trunk of Casey's Pontiac Sunfire revealed unusually high levels of chemical compounds associated with decomposing human remains. His nose, trained by decades in the field, left no doubt the car reeked of death. They introduced a strand of hair recovered from the trunk, which forensic examiners claimed showed signs of postmortem banding, a characteristic often found in hair that had been attached to a decomposing corpse. Although it could not be conclusively matched to Kaylee, it was consistent with her DNA profile. This, they said, pointed to a disturbing conclusion, that Kaylee had been dead in that car. Then came the duct tape. The prosecution focused heavily on 3 pieces of duct tape found near Kaylee's skull, suggesting that it had been placed over her nose and mouth to silence her. to kill her. Drain Burdick emphasized that even though Kaylee's body was too decomposed to reveal a specific cause of death, the presence of the duct tape told its own story. It was murder, not accident. They addressed the chloroform, too, an infamous and confusing piece of the case. In the early months of the investigation, forensic analysts had detected traces of chloroform in the trunk of the car. More damning, the prosecution alleged that someone had searched for chloroform, how to make chloroform, and neck breaking on the family's computer. While defense could later attempt to discredit that data, the prosecution leaned into it as evidence of premeditation. Character witnesses helped reinforce their argument by painting a picture of Casey's calculated dishonesty. Co-workers, friends, and acquaintances testified to the myriad lies Casey had told, claiming she had a nanny named Zenaida Zanny Gonzalez, that she was employed at Universal Studios, that she was actively searching for her daughter when in fact she was attending social events. Every falsehood, the prosecution agreed, was not just deception, it was consciousness of guilt. Throughout their presentation, the prosecution acknowledged what they lacked: no eyewitnesses, no confession, and no clear-cut case of death. Not cold. But their strategy was to amplify the silence between the facts. Each piece of evidence, they insisted, filled in the outline of a chilling narrative. A mother who did not report her child missing because she already knew her daughter was dead. Closing arguments tied these threads into a stark proposition that Casey Anthony had made a decision to end her daughter's life, and then constructed an elaborate facade to protect her freedom. They reminded the jury that circumstantial evidence, when woven together tightly and logically, could be just as compelling as a direct admission of guilt. In many trials, a lack of physical evidence can be a prosecutorial death knell. But here, the state of Florida believed the circumstances themselves, the 31 silent days, the smell in the car, the lies, the duct tape, the digital footprints, told a story no one could ignore. Whether the jury would see that same story or find it too fragmented to convict remained to be seen.
This is a tough case because I get the logic, and in theory it works. It's a sound one, but it's a double-edged sword, in my opinion. And it's a double-edged sword because literally this could also be, the defense could say it was an accident and you can't prove any other, and you can't say any.
And the mother was reeling, so she did what all she knew she could and partied.
Yeah.
She spiraled.
Some things.
She has a mental disorder.
Yeah. Some parts of this theory are more damning than others. The not reporting in the party, very damning. The duct tape, I don't think that's as damning as they think, because literally it could still be reason that there was just she wrapped up the little girl, her daughter, in a blanket or something and duct taped it. She duct taped it odd in a weird way that's not normal. But again, if you're like panicking doing this, you don't know.
But then how did the duct tape get stuck to the skull? It was stuck to the skull. The duct tape shouldn't be inside the bag. You're
right. Again, it's just to me it feels like the duct tape isn't as damning as it is. It's still damning. It's just her reaction and everything to me, if I'm a juror, is telling me more.
This just in, Benjamin Edwards believes that Casey Anthony is innocent.
No, that is not what I'm saying. Absolutely not.
You can email him.
Don't you dare.
His phone number is.
Don't. No, I'm just saying, to me, the duct tape is kind of like, it's damning, but I feel like the smell in her car and going a whole month without saying or doing anything to report your daughter missing is saying more than the duct tape. That's just me. And the digital footprints, I mean, everybody looks up weird shit.
Yeah. Well,
don't look at me like that. Let's
look at your history.
Let's look at your history.
Okay.
You cleared it out, didn't you?
I always do. That's the key. Clear your history or search everything in incognito mode, people. Incognito mode exists for a reason. So the Casey Anthony trial was more than just a battle of narratives. It became a trial of science itself. In a courtroom that oscillated between emotion and logic, one of the most pivotal battlegrounds was the credibility of the forensic evidence, not just what it showed, but how it was interpreted and by whom. From the outset, prosecutors leaned heavily on forensic analysis to bolster their circumstantial case, but almost every key scientific claim introduced by the state was challenged aggressively by the defense, raising fundamental questions about the limits of forensic science and whether science in its current form was being overstretched to prove something it couldn't. One of the most debated subjects was the forensic odor analysis. Dr. Arpad Voss, a senior scientist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, presented groundbreaking but controversial findings. He tested the air samples taken from the trunk of Casey Anthony's Pontiac Sunfire, showed elevated levels of volatile organic compounds, or VOX, consistent with human decomposition. Using gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or GCMS, a method typically reserved for environmental and chemical investigations, Dr. Voss claimed that the chemical fingerprint matched the decomposition of the human body. But as compelling as his testimony sounded, the science behind it was still in its infancy, and largely untested in a criminal courtroom. The defense pounced on this. Jose Baez and his team argued that Voss's decomposition database had not undergone peer review and lacked the scientific consensus required to meet the rigorous standards of admissibility. More damning was the claim that Voss's methodology lacked a control group, the very cornerstone of reproducible scientific results. Had he proven that the trunk didn't just smell like a decomposing body, but only a decomposing body?
That's a valid point. I mean, I'm shocked he would try and introduce this, but I mean, new science to prove criminal cases isn't without precedent. They did that for the Unabomber.
Yeah,
they literally were able to use basically forensic writing to determine his I believe it was the time frame of when he would have went to school. Ted Kaczynski would have went to school and how he wrote it, and they were able to figure out. Well, they published it, and then Ted's brother turned him in.
Then came the controversy over the so-called post-mortem banding of a hair found in the trunk. The FBI hair examiner testified that the strand exhibited signs consistent with death, specifically a dark band near the root that is thought to indicate decomposition. But here again, the defense highlighted that such banding was an established marker of death. The possibility of false positives or environmental contamination cast a shadow over what prosecutors had billed as a critical piece of their timeline. Even the presence of chloroform, once a potential linchpin in the theory of premeditated murder, became a scientific flashpoint. Initial analysis of the car trunk by forensic chemists indicated unusually high levels of chloroform, leading to dramatic claims that it had been used as a chemical weapon to subdue or kill Kayde. But further investigation by FBI expert Michael Rickenbach found that the levels were likely overstated and could be consistent with common household cleaners. To make matters more complicated, it was revealed that one of the initial forensic software programs used to measure the concentration of chloroform had overcounted search visits to websites related to the substance. What was once alleged to be 84 searches turned out to be a single accidental visit. And that literally could be like they had a pool, they're searching for chlorine.
Yeah.
And boom, they accidentally clicked on chloroform.
I believe it is later. It explains where it was or how it got looked up.
So at the heart of these scientific battles was not just the data, but the presentation. Prosecutors used visuals, graphs, and expert testimony to impress upon jurors the authority of their evidence. The defense, meanwhile, peeled back the polished surface to reveal doubt, inconsistency, and theoretical gaps in methodology. The digital forensic evidence added another layer of ambiguity. Investigators found internet searches on the Anthony family computer for terms like chloroform, neck breaking, and internal bleeding. Initially, prosecutors implied these searches were conducted by Casey, but digital timestamps later conflicted with the assumption, and both George and Cindy Anthony were also home at the time. The defense even introduced evidence that Cindy, not Casey, had likely searched for chloroform while researching the effects of chlorophyll on her dogs. At times, the courtroom felt like a crash course in completing scientific philosophies, and an indictment of how over reliance on forensics could mislead. The jury was tasked with parsing not only the content of the scientific claims, but their context. How much weight should be given to theories not yet widely accepted? Could cutting edge science, still evolving, be used to take away someone's life? Even seasoned scientists who observed the trial from afar expressed concerns. Many noted that the prosecution's evidence leaned heavily on novel, under standardized techniques. Others feared the jury wouldn't grasp the nuances. The mystique of science might overpower its limitations. In the end, the forensic evidence, while dramatic, became a double edged sword. Where the prosecution saw validation of guilt, the defense revealed uncertainty. For every scientific conclusion presented, there was a counterargument, a gray area, or a methodological flaw. The Casey Anthony trial didn't just spotlight one of the most polarizing criminal cases in recent American history. It forced the public and the legal system to reckon with a hard truth that science, for all its promise, is not infallible. And when it's placed on the crucible of a murder trial, speculation can look a lot like certainty unless someone is willing to change it.
Unfortunately, that does happen. I think they call it the CSI effect. There have been guilty as sin people who have gotten off of cases because they everybody watches CSI or Bones or something else, and they expect this little tiny speck to be able to prove the whole case. And reality is that that's just not always the case.
Yeah.
And this, like I said, I think the nuance is there. The decomposition, I'm sure he was right. I'm pretty sure he was right. But unfortunately, because it wasn't 100% concrete, it raised reasonable doubt. I mean, we all, especially you smell a dead body, when it's a dead body. No science in the world is going to tell you something different because you trust your nose. Oh, yeah, that's death. That is death right there.
Yeah, I've smelled plenty of dead bodies.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's a smell you never forget.
But unfortunately for this, whatever methodology used was probably just not as concrete as it could have been.
So the Casey Anthony trial was not just a landmark in forensic analysis. It was one of the earliest high-profile criminal cases where digital behavior, internet searches, social media activity, and computer forensics became central to the narrative. But like nearly every other aspect of the trial, the digital evidence did not offer a clean arc of guilt or innocence. Instead, it revealed a tangled web of timelines, search logs, and family testimonies that often contradicted one another and exposed a deeper dysfunction at the core of the Anthony household. At the heart of the prosecution's early digital strategy was a list of incriminating internet searches allegedly made on the Anthony family computer months before Kaylee's disappearance. The terms as presented to the public and the jury were jarring. Chloroform, how to make chloroform, breaking neck, shovel, death, household weapons, internal bleeding, and self-defense. If true, they painted a picture of a mother plotting a methodical and premeditated crime, not the panicked response to an accidental drowning, as the defense later suggested. Prosecution claimed these searches were made in March 2008, several months before Kaylee disappeared, and argued that Casey was the one who made them. Their argument leaned on the timing. The searches were performed during work hours, a period when George and Cindy Anthony were said to be out of the house. That, they reasoned, pointed squarely to Casey. But when the forensic examination of the digital logs were revisited later in the trial, problems began to emerge. The software originally used to analyze internet history, called Cashback, and misrepresented in the frequency of visits. It had initially logged 84 instances of chloroform being searched. In reality, the corrected data showed that only one visit had occurred, and even that appeared to have been the result of clicking a link on a website about chlorophyll, not a direct search. The distinction was critical and fundamentally undermined one of the prosecution's strongest scientific implications.
How many ways can you look up chloroform? 84? Good Lord.
Yeah.
But
I know I said it was wrong.
yeah, it was very wrong.
I'm just saying, in any time, it's like, okay,
Let's find out.
No,
I'll do it on
no,
your computer.
get away from me.
Adding to the confusion were the conflicting testimonies about who had access to the computer and when. Cindy Anthony, in a pivotal moment for the defense, testified that she had performed the chloroform search while trying to find information about potential symptoms in her dogs related to the chlorophyll exposure. She also said she has searched for inhalation and hydrogen peroxide as part of a general inquiry into pet health. While her explanation seemed somewhat implausible, even rehearsed, it introduced just enough doubt to shake the certainty of the original narrative. Here's the thing, though. Why I get the chloroform one. Why are you searching breaking neck? Shovel, death. Shovel, okay.
Somebody wants a shovel?
We're buying a shovel, digging a garden, whatever.
Mm.
Breaking neck.
That's big.
Self-defense. Self-defense against a 2-year-old. How's that work?
I think this is the heart of the confusion, because again, if you're the jury, you're looking at it, it's like this. I don't know.
Chloroform. That's
Chloroform, yeah, you're right, because that could be like, oh, chloroform, like that. But then you get internal bleeding, you get neck break. It's just like, what? It's so confusing. I'm literally staring at it. It's like, this just looks like somebody's random ass Google search.
Yeah.
Like I could, even with a dead child, I'm still looking at it like, I don't see how any of this is relevant. It is relevant to it.
That doubt deepened with an additional layer of technological ambiguity. Although timestamps were provided for some of the searches, the exact user identity behind them couldn't be definitively confirmed. The family computer, located in a common area of the Anthony home, was accessible to multiple users. There was no requirement for individual login accounts, making it impossible to distinguish between George, Cindy, Casey, or even Lee Anthony, though Lee was generally not home during the relevant periods because he actually worked.
Yeah.
Which we'll get into what they say about Lee. The prosecution tried to work around this ambiguity by cross-referencing search times with cell phone records. They presented evidence that Casey's phone had pinged nearby cell towers at the same time as the searches were logged. But even that was not a silver bullet. The defense pointed out that proximity to the home was not the same as being at the computer, and that others could have still conducted the searches while Casey's phone was simply present in the area. Meanwhile, the conflicting statements between George and Cindy Anthony themselves cast further uncertainty on the prosecution's case. At various points in the investigation, Cindy had claimed that she was the last person to see Kaylee on June 16, 2008. George contradicted this timeline, insisting that he saw Kaylee and Casey leaving the house that morning, Kaylee happily trailing her mother. That contradiction proved crucial. If Cindy was correct, it opened the door to a different series of events than what the state was presenting, potentially even leading credence to the defense's drowning narrative. But if George was correct, it aligned more closely with the idea that Kaylee was alive and well the morning she disappeared, and something sinister happened afterward. The problem was the jury was left to weigh not just what was said, but who was more believable, a burden that became more difficult with each passing witness. Now, who's more believable? The well-documented nurse or the well-documented cop? You have both public servants, well-known around here. Like, obviously, he wasn't a cop here, but he was as far as we know, he's a very well-decorated cop.
Mm-hmm.
He just stopped being a cop. And she is a nurse to dying people.
This just seems so confusing because, again, it even taking away their credibility as two upstanding citizens. You to me, it looks like this is a house that is just not talking to each other.
Why do you not have your story straight?
Exactly. So, I mean,
even if you're trying to cover something up, you would think you would have had your story straight.
Exactly, which tells me, to me, at first glance, it looks like, okay, so they're not talking to one another, so a conspiracy is less likely. But at the same time, how do you just not say, hey, I saw Casey with Kaylee today? or something like that. It's like, do you all just not talk to each other?
Well,
Are
here's
you all
my
just-
thought. My thought is, if we look at this, so George being a cop, ethically as a cop, can he lie on stand?
Mm.
Again, as far as we know, he was an upstanding cop. He served very well. He did time as a detective. So he's been in courtrooms like this. Ethically, can he do that? Now we look at the mother. Yes, she's a nurse. She's also a mother. She's going to, as much as she loves her granddaughter, she was a mother before she was a grandmother.
Yeah.
So she will say anything to protect her daughter.
And we'll get more into that later
Because that's how I would tear it apart.
Cindy's changes a story.
Oh yeah, I don't like Cindy. I very much think Cindy covered for Casey.
I feel like she's covering in the after fact. She's trying to probably guilt is pushing her to the fact that I caused this because I did a shit job of raising my kid, and my daughter in turn killed her daughter. This is my fault. I must do everything to protect my daughter.
And then ethically, George is like, I have this ethic obligation to do this. I swore an oath at one time to do this.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, we know that they try to say that he caused the drowning, blah, 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 blah. But I don't believe
but
that.
If I remember right, George never changed the story.
No, he didn't. And
not once.
And for a cop covering up a crime, he did a really shitty job.
Exactly, which I feel, again,
I know from being a cop, you never would have found the body.
No.
You never would have found that car would have been scrapped.
Again, this is just me. You cover up a crime, any evidence is going to be 200 miles away from where it actually happened, because nobody will look there. No one will think to look there. And if anyone does find it, they're going to be
thrown into the Atlantic Ocean. That's it.
Or something.
Or even the Pacific.
Yeah. Well, again,
I'm going to take it across country and go into the Pacific.
Once they found that little girl's body in the same neighborhood as the Anthony's, everyone knew that's Kaylee.
Exactly.
Now imagine if they had found it in, say, rural Alabama. Nobody would have thought Kaylee Anthony. Nobody, because they would have just been like, "My God, what happened?"
I'll tell you, as a Floridian and a former cop, FBI, I'm not planning on killing anybody, and I never have, but this is what I would have done, is I would have gone down to the Everglades as
I feel like everybody goes down to the Everglades.
But there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
When you have gators that are 7-8 feet.
Yeah.
And then you also have all the snakes down there.
The snakes won't do anything. They won't eat something that big. And you have a huge population of them, and you have a lot of swamp water. You just toss the body in, evidence takes care of itself.
Which is why I personally believe the parents were not. I don't feel like, my gut is telling me they were not involved in the cover.
I don't think George was.
At least George.
I feel like George would have. Again, he was a detective.
He would have known how to do this if he was inclined to do that. If he was inclined to cover,
he would have done it, and he never would have gotten caught.
Exactly.
At least for a while.
And the thing is, George, it was always Casey and Cindy butting heads. Always.
George was the quiet one.
Yeah, he was just stayed out of the way, and that's what he did. Cindy, I feel like she would have. It seems consistent with, like, okay, this is somebody who tried to cover up, who didn't know what they were doing, but at the same time, I just have a hard time that she would. I feel like if Cindy was involved, she would have dragged George into it, which in turn, I think so.
No.
Well, no, I don't know, because I think Cindy's involved in the backpedaling. She wasn't involved in the crime.
No, yeah. Which is why I'm saying I don't think that. Bless you. I don't think Cindy and George are involved in the cover of the actual crime.
I think Cindy's the one who is trying to backpedal and save her daughter.
Yeah, I can
death.
I can see that.
And 100%. George is just like whatever.
Yeah, I can see that. So I don't. I don't see Cindy being involved in the actual covering up. This all strikes of somebody who didn't know what they were doing. They probably, and again, she probably died. Casey threw the body into the trunk, left it there for a while, and then was like, okay, I got to get rid of this. It's starting to smell the car.
Yeah.
Into the swamp.
So, adding further strain was the discovery of deleted data. Forensic analysts found traces of deleted internet history on the computer, including references to chest trauma and household weapons. The question remained, who deleted the data and why? No one in the family admitted to wiping anything from the machine, but its absence raised questions about intentional concealment and whether evidence was lost that could have clarified who had been more incriminating who was behind the more incriminating activity. Yeah, make sure when you delete something, you delete it fully. Yeah. It's called clearing your cache.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not telling you to delete something from a crime, but if you're going to do anything, make sure you do it fully. The defense made good use of the confusion. Jose Baez used the overlapping timelines, shared computer access, and contradictory family testimonies to sow doubt about every major digital detail presented. Without the ability to definitively tie Casey to a single search, and with family members offering alternate, if not entirely credible explanations, the prosecution's theory of premeditation lost critical traction. In many ways, the digital trail became symbolic of the case itself, scattered, inconsistent, and open to interpretation. The computer, often viewed as a black and white record of user intent, offered no conclusive answers. Instead, it mirrored the dysfunction of the household that operated it, where the truth and illusion lived side by side and where certainty was constantly slipping through the cracks. As the trial wore on, it became clear that technology, once expected to provide a smoking gun, instead left jurors with more questions than answers. In a world where a person's search history can betray their secrets, the Casey Anthony case served as a cautionary tale of how even the digital can deceive, and how easily a shadow of doubt can eclipse even the harvest light of suspicion.
So I feel like this was a mistake on the prosecution's point to introduce that for just that reason. It's a shared computer. You can't prove who was in there. And let's just think about this logically. So, barring the fact that if we take away the whole premeditation, which there's only one person there who would ever do it, and that's Casey. If this is an accidental death, which I do think so, if you're panicking and you're anything, I feel like you're not going to just stop and Google something while doing this. I feel like if Casey ran to her parents' house and it's like, Kaylee's dead, I don't know what to do, like an accident happened, and you've got a nurse and a cop, albeit a retired cop. You're not going to go and stop and Google something.
Yeah.
Everything is just purely on instinct. What do we do? Nobody is stopping to sit down at a computer. And this is 2011, so they really, searching on your phone really wasn't a thing at that point, I don't believe.
I mean, it was.
It was not like it is, not like today though. So I really feel like the prosecution should not have really introduced this, because I know what they were going for. They were trying to say this was premeditated, but this is so confusing that I don't. You just confused it. I can see how the jury got confused by this one.
So, when the defense stood before the jury for their opening statement in the courtroom shifted from a slow build of circumstantial detail to a moment of seismic shock. In a case already saturated with public outrage and tabloid intrigue, attorney Jose Baez's opening argument broke away from every expectation. What he delivered was not just a theory of accidental death, it was a full reimagining of the story the world thought it knew. One that turned the prosecution's narrative on its head and made the Anthony household itself a crucible of trauma, secrecy, and dysfunction. Baez began by rejecting outright the allegation that Casey Anthony murdered her daughter. Instead, he claimed Kaylee Marie Anthony had drowned in the family's backyard swimming pool on June 16, 2008, the very day Casey was last seen with her alive. The defense insisted this was not a calculated homicide, but a terrible accident that spiraled into chaos, not because of a criminal cover-up by Casey, but because of a long-standing pattern of emotional repression and family manipulation. The most explosive claim came next, and it reverberated far beyond the courtroom. Baez alleged that Casey's behavior in the aftermath of her daughter's death could be explained by years of sexual abuse at the hands of her father, George Anthony. According to Baez, George had molested Casey from the time she was 8 years old, instilling in her a psychological framework of deception, secrecy, and shame. That early trauma, Baez argued, had conditioned Casey to suppress emotion, to lie as a survival mechanism, and to remain compliant in the face of trauma, all of which explained her bizarre behavior during the 31 days Kaylee was missing. And I will say this, literally no evidence of her being sexually assaulted.
Nope.
Nothing. So this was just a, let's throw this at the wall and see if it sticks.
Which it clearly did, at least to a degree.
It more was to prove reasonable doubt.
Yeah. I don't believe it happened.
They were trying to make Casey a victim.
Of course.
So that you saw her as a victim and you were like, oh, okay, let's not give her the death penalty. So, Baez painted a disturbing portrait of a household where appearances were paramount and uncomfortable truths were systematically buried. In this version of events, George Anthony was not only complicit in covering up Kaylee's drowning, he was also the architect of a broader family dysfunction that predated the tragedy. Baez alleged that George discovered Kaylee's lifeless body in the pool, panicked, and helped his daughter dispose of the evidence to avoid scrutiny, just as he had allegedly taught her to hide pain throughout her life. The courtroom reaction was stunned silence. Many legal analysts watching the trial described the opening statement as one of the most audacious in modern criminal law. But it wasn't just the content, it was the psychological strategy behind it. Baez wasn't merely offering an alternative sequence of events. He was reframing the entire emotional and moral lens through which the jury would be asked to view Casey. Baez also laid the groundwork for further shocking implications, including hints that Lee Anthony, Casey's brother, had also exhibited inappropriate behavior toward her. Though not elaborated on as extensively, the suggestion alone was enough to destabilize the narrative that Casey lived in a typical loving family. While neither George nor Lee Anthony had ever been charged with abuse, and both vehemently denied the accusations, the defense had successfully planted seeds of doubt in the jury's mind about the integrity of the prosecution's central witness. Now, here's the thing. When we talk about sexual abuse, there's usually a history of somebody who commits it.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see it somewhere, especially somebody as old as George. You're going to see it. You're going to see he had some kind of sexual sadism or something in his past. There was nothing. The man had a clean record.
Mm-hmm.
Well-decorated cop. I'm not saying cops can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that at all. But there was no evidence of this. This came out of left fucking field.
Which is probably what the defense was hoping for, that this would shock. You know, she was molested. Because it's everybody's reaction when you see that, especially when it's against somebody where there is no evidence of it happening.
Beyond the personal accusations, Baez made another crucial tactical move. He openly acknowledged Casey's lies. Instead of trying to distance his client from her well-documented fabrications about her job at Universal Studios, about a non-existent nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, and about her whereabouts during the month Kaylee was missing, Baez embraced them. He told the jury Casey had lied, yes, but not that she was a murderer. But not because she was a murderer. She lied because lying had been her only defense mechanism for years, ingrained by years of psychological abuse. In doing so, the defense shifted the burden of the case from Casey's actions to the why behind those actions. It wasn't about whether she lied. The jury knew she did. But whether those lies were part of a murder cover-up or a result of deeply conditioned trauma and emotional instability. Baez's goal was to make Casey relatable, even pitiable. He presented her not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a deeply broken woman raised in a home of control and emotional concealment.
So, to me, honestly, at this point, I'm really shocked Cindy is still, I believe she's still backing her daughter up at this point. I am really shocked she just didn't be like, oh, hell no. Because again, she's there too. I mean, to be fair, I'm sure there are plenty of cases where child molestation what did occur in a household and not everybody was obviously privy to it, including the mother. We've seen that, and there's countless stories of it happening. Now, personally, I think a lot of those stories are just willful delusion. You know, the signs are probably there. They just willfully didn't ignored it because they were more concerned with keeping up appearances. But I'm really shocked that everything for the defense didn't unravel when they did that, because again, every other reasonable doubt aspects from the other parts of the prosecution case are being challenged by Cindy and George, because they're saying like, yeah, we did this searches. Yeah, this thing. They are poking holes in the prosecution's cases. And then this happens. I'm really shocked they just didn't be like, fuck you, and just undo everything. Because again, I feel like the prosecution was really banking on the emotions of it. Everybody is going to hate Casey Anthony so much that they're going, no matter what is there, or in this case not there, they're going to find her guilty.
Yeah. Critically, Baez didn't overpromise on evidence. He didn't claim he would definitively prove George Anthony's abuse or show a surveillance tape of Kaylee's drowning. Instead, he leaned heavily into reasonable doubt, the cornerstone of the defense. If jurors couldn't be absolutely sure of how Kaylee died, and if the family dynamics were more fractured and dysfunctional than they had been led to believe, then perhaps it wasn't murder after all. Prosecution had laid out a timeline grounded in circumstantial evidence, forensic suggestion, and behavioral suspicion. Baez, in contrast, offered an emotional battlefield, a place where trauma, dysfunction, and denial collided in the worst way possible. And it worked on one essential level. It reframed the way the jury would interpret everything that followed. Every witness, every piece of evidence, every forensic report would not be filtered through two competing realities. One clinical and circumstantial, the other emotional and unstable. But Baez's statement also came with risk. It relied heavily on the jury's willingness to believe in psychological trauma they couldn't see and abuse they couldn't confirm. The defense had opened with a shockwave, but to maintain its impact, Baez would need to thread an extremely fine needle, humanizing a defendant who had become a national villain without offering the kind of concrete evidence jurors were used to relying on. Still, from a strategic standpoint, Baez had succeeded in his first mission. He had unsettled the narrative. He had reoriented the jury's empathy, and perhaps, most importantly, he had introduced a story compelling enough to make not guilty a real possibility. Not because it explained everything, but because it challenged the state's version of what happened just enough. And Baez actually became really famous because of this. Yeah. This was unheard of. And he became a very well hired defense attorney after this.
I mean, this is the Hail Mary of all Hail Marys.
Yeah.
I feel like if the prosecution had, I'll wait till after the episode for my final thoughts, but I feel like this is on the prosecution of why this defense came up.
Yeah, he.
Yeah, I can imagine everybody would want him for a defense attorney. I mean, he got basically one of the most guilty people that, in the court of public opinion, was the most guilty person since OJ off of murder.
Well, you know who else he was a lawyer for?
No.
So Casey Anthony, Aaron Hernandez.
Oh, didn't really win that one.
And Harvey Weinstein.
Didn't win that.
Well, these are high profile cases.
Oh yeah. Didn't really win those last two.
Oh,
I remember Aaron Hernandez trial. We were living in Massachusetts when that happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, he he is a very big time attorney now. So the courtroom became a battleground of conflicting memories, strained alliances, and emotional detonations as witness after witness took the stand in state of Florida versus Casey Marie Anthony. With every testimony, the trial edged closer to its central question. Was Casey Anthony a cold and calculating killer, or a broken product of a deeply dysfunctional household who had spiraled into lies after tragedy? The witnesses in this case weren't just bystanders or forensic experts. Many were Casey's own family members and former friends, forced to testify under oath about their intimate and often painful knowledge of the woman at the center of national scrutiny. The result was not a unified narrative, but a mosaic of contradictions, emotional eruptions, and at times bewildering reversals. George Anthony was the first family member called to the stand, and his testimony was one of the most emotionally charged. For the prosecution, he was a key witness in establishing a timeline and reinforcing the appearance of a stable home that Casey disrupted. But under cross-examination, George's position became precarious. The defense painted him not only as a potential complicit figure in the aftermath of Kaylee's death, but also as an alleged abuser and master of manipulation. Baez's direct confrontation with George over the claim that he had molested his daughter, though not fully fleshed out in trial testimony, cast a long shadow over everything George said. While George denied any abuse and insisted he had no involvement in Kaylee's disappearance or any cover-up, the jury had already primed to question his credibility. At one point during testimony, George broke down in tears, not when discussing his granddaughter's death, but when recounting his own suicide attempt in January 2009. The emotional toll was evident, but so was the lack of clarity. Was he a grieving grandfather overwhelmed with guilt, or a man hiding truths too dark to bear? Cindy Anthony's presence on the witness stand offered a different kind of tension, not confrontational, but ambiguous and protective. On one hand, she had been the catalyst for the investigation, having placed the now infamous 911 call reporting Kaylee missing and mentioning the odor of decomposition in Casey's car. On the other hand, when it came time to testify under oath, she seemed to walk back crucial statements. One of the most pivotal moments came when Cindy reclaimed that she, not Casey, had searched for chloroform on the family's home computer, claim that had contradicted her earlier interviews and appeared to many as deliberate attempt to deflect blame. She also testified that a stain in the trunk on the Pontiac Sunfire, which prosecutors claimed was caused by Kaylee's decomposing body, had been there for years, ever since they purchased the car. These contradictions raised serious questions about her motivations. Was she lying to protect her daughter, or simply struggling to reconcile maternal instinct with devastating facts? Her testimony, filled with pauses, deflections, and occasional tears, was difficult for jurors to interpret, and perhaps that was precisely the point. It added to the growing web of ambiguity, deepening the narrative of a family whose collective dysfunction blurred the lines between truth and denial. Casey's brother, Lee Anthony, added yet another layer to the fractured family dynamic. On the stand, Lee spoke of feeling excluded during Casey's pregnancy and admitted to being kept in the dark about many details of her life. While he remained composed throughout much of his testimony, his emotions broke through when he discussed how no one had told him about Kaylee's birth. His tears reflected a personal grief, not only for the niece he had lost, but perhaps also for the role he felt he never fully played in her life. Baez also hinted at Lee's inappropriate behavior toward Casey, though the court limited how far this could be explored, and that implication hung heavily over his testimony. It wasn't just what Lee said that mattered, it was how the jury might interpret what was being left unsaid.
I mean, it does raise a question of why Lee seems to be sidelined on very many pivotal moments in Casey's life.
Not really.
I mean, I personally think it's just because they don't like each other and she just doesn't give a shit. That's my personal
I think it was more the parents. Casey was a troubled child and needed more guidance. Lee didn't do anything wrong, went to school, had good grades, all of that, so he didn't need the supervision Casey needed. Lee fell through the cracks.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, that supervision clearly didn't really work that well.
Among the most talked about witnesses was Tony Lazzaro, Casey's boyfriend at the time of Kaylee's disappearance. Lazzaro's testimony painted a picture of a young woman who, despite allegedly knowing her child was missing, or worse, spent her days clubbing, getting tattoos, and staying over at his apartment. He told the court Casey had never mentioned Kaylee being missing during those 31 days and showed no signs of distress. His testimony strengthened the prosecution's narrative that Casey was not a grieving mother, but a young woman unburdened by responsibility. The jury heard how she participated in a hot body contest just days after Kaylee's disappearance and had even gotten a tattoo reading Bella Vita, or Italian for beautiful life. Lazzaro's testimony, delivered in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, was one of the prosecution's clearest illustrations of Casey's post-disappearance behavior, and it resonated with the public already skeptical of her innocence. And this, Tony Lazzaro, was a key to the prosecution. The defense thought that he was going to cover for Casey because that was her boyfriend. But he went, no, she never talked about Kaylee. She partied. She won a hot body contest.
Yeah.
She's hot as fuck. And she was a very attractive woman.
Yeah.
Just fucking psycho.
Most of them are.
She's a narcissistic sociopath.
Most attractive women are psycho. So.
Why the fuck are you looking at me? I'm not psycho.
Other key witnesses filled in the gaps. Former friends such as Amy Bazinga spoke about Casey stealing checks, lying about where she lived, and showing little urgency in locating her missing daughter. Law enforcement officers, including those who questioned Casey, testified about her inconsistencies and ever-changing stories. Even the handler of a cadaver dog testified that the animal had alerted to the scent of decomposition in the trunk of Casey's car, a significant point for the prosecution. But the defense, ever tactical, countered these testimonies with challenges to memory, interpretation, and motive. Were people projecting guilt onto Casey because of what they assumed happened? Could her friends really know what she was feeling inside?
I mean, when you're literally
partying while your kid's dead?
Yeah.
I don't care what you're feeling inside.
Yeah, you're kind of shitty at that point.
In most criminal trials, witness testimony serves to clarify a narrative. In the Casey Anthony trial, it often did the opposite. The contradictions weren't just prosecution and defense. They existed within the same household, even among the same witnesses across different statements. The Anthony family had become a courtroom drama unto itself, revealing a web of shifting loyalties, emotional wounds, and unresolved tensions that left the jury in a fog of psychological complexity. Rather than serving as clear moral anchors, the witnesses became symbols of uncertainty. They pushed the jury further into the realm of doubt, not just legal, but human. In a system that demands certainty for a conviction, that fog was enough to slow down momentum and unsettle even the most damning of theories. Now, as the prosecution neared the end of its case and the defense prepared to rest, the looming presence of the American legal system's most sacred principle, like I said before, reasonable doubt, began to cast a defining shadow over the proceedings. Jurors were not tasked with discovering the truth in some cosmic or emotional sense. Their duty was procedural, to determine whether the state had met its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In the Casey Anthony trial, this fundamental threshold became the most powerful player in the room, silent, abstract, yet omnipresent. From the outset, the prosecution's case had been meticulously built upon circumstantial pillars. There was no eyewitnesses to a crime, no clear cause of death, and no direct forensic link tying Casey to the act of murder. And while many outside the courtroom felt confident about her guilt, bolstered by gut reactions, media portrayals, and Casey's strange behavior, the jury had to operate with strict evidentiary lines. Sympathy, anger, and speculation could not substitute for concrete proof. Every juror in the Casey Anthony trial was carefully selected and instructed to check personal feelings at the courtroom door. Yet, as they listened to emotional testimonies from a grieving family, watched footage of Kaylee's second birthday, and examined chilling evidence such as duct tape recovered near a child's remains, the human reaction was inevitable. And keep in mind, I've watched pieces of this trial, and they're like putting the duct tape in the jurors' faces. So you're physically seeing this. They didn't just show pictures. They're physically bringing this evidence out, because if you could see it in your face,
Oh yeah.
pictures one thing, but physically seeing this, you can almost feel the emotion coming from the evidence.
I mean, I think, as I said, presentation is everything. I'll reference OJ trial again,
which is something we'll do later on.
That's another 4-parter.
Yeah.
This has led to the very infamous phrase from that courtroom when they finally,
glove don't fit,
you must acquit. You can see they actually had OJ stand in front of the jury with the gloves on, and they didn't fit. Now, a smart person would have looked at, if you look at it again, he's literally wearing thick rubber gloves on there, which to me was really weird.
They actually layered his evidence gloves. It's the gloves fit. OJ was.
They very much fit. They probably were a little snug on him.
They took and put like our evidence gloves.
Yeah.
They put multiple layers on to make his hands bigger, so that because the gloves only went down to just above the bottom of his palm. So without those, they would have fit tight.
Yeah, it would have been.
Plus, it's believed that they also tried to shrink the leather too.
It was,
if you heat leather up, it shrinks. Or actually, sorry, if you make leather cold, it shrinks.
But in this case, it worked because the jury, as you said, it wasn't just a picture of a glove with a size on there that shows, it's his size. It would have fit his hand. You literally had him try and put it on. It didn't work. You're literally showing pictures in Casey Anthony's cases of this poor little girl, this vibrant little girl who's in a birthday party. This is horrible. She died. Yes, it is, but it's not evidence. It's just you're playing on the emotional heartstrings of the jury.
Are we saying that Johnny Cochran lied?
Yes.
So Johnny Cochran was OJ's lawyer.
One of his lawyers. Also, the other lawyer was
Robert Kardashian.
Yeah, Kim Kardashian's father.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I know that part.
And then many, many others. Robert Shapiro was one of them.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's related to Ben Shapiro.
I don't think so. But I mean,
they're not.
But as I said, it's just, where's the evidence? And this, for Casey Anthony, where is the evidence?
Yeah, so we'll do OJ at some point. So, however, legal guilt isn't measured by what one feels happened. It must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And herein lay the defense's primary advantage. The ambiguity that existed around almost every critical piece of evidence. Even as the prosecution wove its narrative, one of a mother overwhelmed by the pressures of parenting, choosing a beautiful life over responsibility, it could not definitively answer one essential question. How did Kaylee die? Dr. Jan Garavaglia, the chief medical examiner, had ruled Kaylee's death a homicide, but was unable to determine an exact cause of time of death. There was no trauma to the skeletal remains. The only truly evocative physical detail, the duct tape allegedly found near the skull, could not be definitively connected to murder. Could it have been applied post-mortem during a misguided attempt to conceal the body? Or worse, had it simply become entangled after months of exposure in the Florida woods?
It's kind of a bit of a coincidence that, there's duct tape in the same swamp where her body is, but you're more expert on what's get dumped into Florida. Yeah, so
people throw trash in those. The ambiguity mattered. The lack of cause of death meant that the jury had no clear starting point from which to connect Casey's behavior to a specific provable criminal act. The state could suggest motive, opportunity, and circumstantial evidence, but it could not prove how Kaylee died, let alone who was responsible. Another legal weak point in the prosecution's case was the timeline. Without knowing when Kayde died, the state couldn't build a conclusive sequence of events. Was she killed on June 16th, the last day she was seen alive by her grandparents? Or had her death occurred later? If the state couldn't pinpoint the time of death, how could they prove premeditation or deliberate concealment? Casey's strange behavior during the 31 days Kayde was missing, partying, shopping, getting tattoos, certainly cast her in a negative light, but in a legal context, erratic conduct does not equal guilt. The defense capitalized on this point repeatedly, arguing that behavior alone, however distasteful, does not constitute evidence of murder. Key forensic evidence also failed to provide a definitive link. Much was made of the smell in the trunk of Casey's car, described by investigators as the unmistakable odor of decomposition, but scientific opinions diverged. Some experts argued that the air samples contained signs of a decomposing body, while others said such results could be caused by garbage or rotting meat. Similarly, the prosecution's initial claim that there were 84 computer searches for chloroform, potentially to suggest premeditation, later unraveled under further investigation. The forensic analyst who testified to the 84 searches eventually acknowledged an error in the software used to analyze the data, later admitting that only one search could be confirmed. Each time a piece of forensic evidence was introduced, it seemed that its impact was diluted, either by conflicting expert opinions or by questions about reliability and interpretation. The end result was cumulative doubt, which, again, is the quite opposite of reasonable doubt. Casey Anthony did not take the stand in her own defense. Legally, she didn't need to, and tactically, her attorneys knew that she was more a liability than an asset under cross-examination.
Oh yeah, if
the
she
prosecution would have torn her to pieces.
That
and it would have probably led to a completely different conviction than what it was.
Here's the other thing: she would have lied under oath.
Yeah, she would have She would have been convicted because
she would have lied under oath, and right then and there, trial's done.
Mm-hmm.
Trial's done. She's immediately guilty for lying under oath.
Yeah, I mean, because the lack of evidence and the circumstantial nature of it all spoke volumes. All she could do was just strengthen the prosecution's case. That's all she could do. Now, that was probably the only smart thing she ever really did, was just keep her mouth shut.
So just keep in mind, if she would have been, that would have been perjury. Perjury is a felony. You get 5 years in a federal court for that.
Damn.
Just for that, and a fine of up to like $250,000.
It's no joke.
Yeah. She would have perjured herself.
Oh yeah.
So her credibility, long eroded by proven lies to investigators, was already tenuous. Baez and Mason gambled instead on the jury's discomfort with the unanswered questions and the prosecution's burden of proof. Their decision not to have Casey testify ultimately placed even more pressure on the state to deliver a watertight case. When that failed to materialize, the absence of her voice became an advantage, not a weakness. And unfortunately for the prosecution, they can't bring her in.
You can't be forced to testify. Essentially would be against
a
yourself.
Defendant.
Yeah, you can't testify against yourself.
So now they can question anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But because she's a defendant, they can't bring her up there to question her. And that's why the defense never did it, because if they were allowed to, then they would have just helped cross-examine her. So legal analysts watching the trial drew comparisons to other high-profile cases, most notably O.J. Simpson. In both cases, the prosecution seemed to have a moral upper hand, but struggled to translate that into legal certainty. And like Simpson, Casey Anthony had a defense team that effectively weaponized reasonable doubt. They didn't need to convince the jury of her innocence. They only needed to show that the state couldn't prove guilt. And here's the thing. OJ had all the money in the world to pay the best lawyers.
Actually, he really, from what I understood, he really didn't. That was kind of partially a motivation as to what made him snap at his ex-wife, was the fact that he was running out of money. His attempt to become a film star from a football star didn't really work out. He had a few bit pieces, but he
You know
didn't.
who O.J. Simpson is, right?
Yes, I
Okay.
do.
I'm just making sure.
Actually, that's a fairly
Not
reasonable
a lot of people
question.
know who O.J. Simpson is.
I know that he was friends with the Kardashians. That's why Robert defended him.
O.J. Simpson was friends with a lot of people.
Yeah. He was obviously well past his prime of being a football star. He couldn't do a Brett Favre and try and come back. And his divorce from his ex-wife had just basically drained him. And so that he mostly got those lawyers because of the publicity of the case. Johnny Cochran was always nothing more than a very big glorified ambulance chaser. And he did not pass up an opportunity to defend one of the most high-profile African-American celebrities in America at the time. And on top of that, there was a lot of racial tension in Los Angeles at the time that led to that too.
And we also need to do O.J. because it's Ben's team.
Yeah.
He played 11 seasons and most of it was for the Bills.
Yeah, that's what, but...
That was, yeah.
Don't talk, Bills Mafia does not talk about O.J. Simpson. We don't talk about him.
Yeah.
He's like Bruno.
He played for the Bills for most of his career and then played for the 49ers for like 2 years.
Yeah.
But he was mostly a Bills running back.
He was a Heisman Trophy winner.
He was very good. Don't get me wrong. He's a great football player.
Oh my God.
There's a reason he played in 6 Pro Bowls.
Yeah, no. If O.J. Simpson wasn't such a garbage human being, he should be celebrated up there with like Joe Montana and everything like that. He was just that good. The Juice.
That's his nickname, was the Juice. Not just because of his initials.
Yeah, but he was
such a
powerful
great
running
back.
But again, piece of shit who murdered 2 people.
So, as the case neared its end, the pressure on jurors intensified. Public sentiment was clearly aligned against Casey. She had been vilified in national media and dubbed the most hated woman in America. But in that courtroom, sequestered and instructed to deliberate solely on admissible evidence, the jury had to make a decision that defied emotion. They would not be judging what kind of person Casey Anthony was. They would be answering a narrower, colder question. Did the prosecution prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed murder? The prosecution's inability to close every loop, to eliminate all other explanations, to definitively tie Casey to Kaylee's death, to present unambiguous scientific conclusions left space for that fundamental doubt. And in the American system of justice, doubt favors the defendant. The burden of proof in this case wasn't simply a formality. It became the final hurdle the state could not clear, and the legal lifeline that would ultimately change everything. So, as the courtroom fell silent and closing arguments came to an end, the Casey Anthony trial left the nation suspended in uncertainty. After weeks of testimony, forensic deep dives, and dueling narratives, the outcome rested not on what the public believed, but on what the jury could be certain of. And in the absence of certainty, without a clear cause of death, without indisputable physical evidence, without a consistent timeline, the principle of reasonable doubt took center stage. This episode has explored the high-stakes tension between circumstantial evidence and constitutional protections. What unfolded in that Florida courtroom was not just a story of a mother and a lost child. It became a litmus test for how justice is determined when emotion collides with law, and when the loudest voices outside the courtroom can't shape the verdict inside it. The trial exposed deep divides in public opinion, in scientific interpretation, and even in the structure of our criminal justice system. While prosecutors painted Casey Anthony as a cold, careless mother, her defense successfully planted just enough uncertainty to leave open the possibility of another truth, or no truth at all. For many, the conclusion of the trial would bring outrage. For others, it would raise haunting questions that still linger to this day. But for the jury, it would come down to this. Could they say with absolute confidence that Casey Anthony killed her daughter? They couldn't, and that's what changed everything. Next time, we turn to the aftermath. The verdict stuns the nation. Emotions run high as the courtroom empties and the streets outside erupt in disbelief. But this case didn't end with a not guilty verdict, it only evolved. From new accusations to media fallout, family fractures to public protests, the story of Casey Anthony didn't conclude in the courtroom. It entered a new volatile chapter. one that would redefine reputations, law, and the very legacy of Kaylee Anthony. So, with that, we want to thank everybody for listening and visiting the Scarlet Tavern. Please remember to turn in your glasses, push in your seat, and as always, tip the bard. Good night, everybody.
Good night.